Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Now in today's video, I'm going to be talking you through my top 3 tips for responsive website design in Framer. So if you're a client of a developer and they've handed you a website and you want to make some simple changes to the copy, to the images, or some simple layout tweaks, this video is going to show you how you can do that without affecting the responsiveness of your site. On the other hand, if you're a designer or developer yourself and you're using Framer, this should help you know how to take your website from desktop over to tablet and mobile responsively and with the most success. Now, before we dive too deep into this, it's probably worth quickly defining what responsiveness means. A responsive website, quite simply, is one that responds to the width of the device it's being viewed on and lays its content out effectively to display what it needs to on that particular screen size. So for a long time, websites were primarily targeting desktops and laptops and worked great, but then came the surge of mobile internet users and the website needed to start to respond to smaller screens. Initially, this was just achieved with what was known as fluid design, where the vast majority of elements were stretched across the full width of the screen. But as time's gone on and we've got some more and more complex websites being built, it's actually become more and more possible to achieve much nicer layouts across different screen widths. And beyond just stretching out to 100% width, there's now a few new tweaks that we can do between devices thanks to advancements in CSS and web code. So we're going to approach responsive website design in Framer in just 3 steps. Now, it's important to note that while these steps will work for the vast majority of websites, as website structure and layout becomes more and more complex and unique, there is a slight chance that this might not be the approach needed for your specific website. And if that is the case, then drop a comment below and I'll do my best to help you out either there in the comments or in a future video. But as I said, these 3 points will work for the vast majority of websites. So we're going to look at number 1, editing the desktop breakpoint first. Number 2, avoiding the use of fixed dimensions. And number 3, using max width and min height to set sizing. These 3 are probably the most important things you need to learn to master responsive website design in Framer. So let's jump into point 1 and have a look at why we need to focus on editing the desktop variant primarily. So here we are in Framer, and we're going to start by talking about why it's really important that for the vast majority of changes you wish to make to your site, that you use the desktop breakpoint first. The desktop breakpoint can kind of be thought of as a master breakpoint, meaning that any changes that you make, such as adjusting the height of this image, are reflected across all other screen widths. So you can see here, as I make the picture smaller or bigger, you can see that the tablet and mobile versions also adjust at the same time. The other way around, however, if I adjust the height of the image on the mobile, it doesn't reflect on any other devices other than itself. So it's kind of the main benefit here is that we can edit once on the desktop and instantly reflect those changes across all other sizes. So for the sake of simplicity, you want to make sure that the vast majority of edits you make are to the desktop variant, and you shouldn't then have to go and make them another 2 times on the other variants. That said, every now and then, so for example with this image, let's say we want it about this size here on desktop, it looks okay on tablet, but it starts to look a bit too tall on mobile. We might want to perform what's called an override and make this image, say, slightly smaller. Now, this is not the necessarily best way to keep the image to the same proportions, so I'll talk about that in a second. But as you can see, now I've adjusted this on mobile. If I come over to the design panel on the right, and have a look at the height property, you can see that it's turned blue. That's letting me know that I've made a manual override on this particular breakpoint that no longer reflects the desktop breakpoint's default values. So now if I go back to desktop and start adjusting the height, tablet responds, but mobile doesn't change. And that's because we've set this override. So if I click on the height and reset the override, go back to desktop and carry on making those changes, you can see that it once again responds to the desktop breakpoint. So the thing I said there about proportions with images, let's say that you've got an image that you kind of want this sort of rectangular shape to be consistent across all devices. Nice and simple, with the width set to fill and the height set to wherever you want it to be so that the proportions are correct. Just click on this little padlock and it will lock those proportionally so the height and width ratios remain the same across all devices. So as you can see, that's a really easy way to make an image responsive without needing to do too much. And again, we've made that edit to desktop, which means it's going to be reflected in those smaller breakpoints. So just to recap there, the reasons that we want to primarily make edits on desktop is because those changes will be instantly updated across all other screen widths. In addition, it keeps it really simple and means that you don't have to repeat actions when you make those edits on other screens. So for example, let's say we want to make some changes to the copy. Let's select this headline here and say, instead of web design, we're going to change it to development. And as you can see, it's updated it across all devices. But let's say I do this on the tablet version. Let's call that design again. You can see that I've actually edited the text there on tablet, but the desktop and mobile variants haven't updated at all. So that's why it's really important that you don't try and make changes on any screen size other than the desktop, because as I said earlier, all changes on desktop are reflected on all other breakpoints, where that is not true for all other breakpoints to all other breakpoints in the desktop. So as you can see, I've made this change on tablet. We've now got an override on the content. It's gone blue. And therefore on tablet, this will say something completely different to what it will say on desktop and mobile. So if you're trying to make changes to your copy, that's why it's crucial that you make that change on the desktop version, just so you can ensure that that is reflected on all screen sizes. The sorts of changes that you are going to want to make as an override are things like font size or image size if you're not going with the approach that I've gone with here. So for example, if we select the headline again, on desktop, 60 works great. On tablet, you might want to bring that down to say 52. And as you get down towards mobile, somewhere around 38 could look better. So you can see that's an override that is, a good idea. It helps you make sure that your font responds well across all screen sizes, but it's a change that it almost doesn't matter because you'll want it to be different on different screen sizes, and it shouldn't affect things too much if you then start making edits on desktop. Because as I said, if you make changes on desktop to something that has an override on another screen size, it's not going to change at all. But for something like font, we want different font sizes on different screens, because otherwise there comes a point where it doesn't display correctly, as we can see here on mobile. We need to make sure that that font size is allowing the text to fit the screen. So that's why every now and then we do need to use overrides, even though it's important that we primarily use the desktop to make edits. So point number 2 was about using fixed dimensions or fixed heights and widths. So we can come back to the image, and if we just remove the padlock here just to reset that, and we're going to set the height and width to be fixed. So let's say 300 by 200 is the height and width. Now at the moment, that kind of, you can see all of the picture on all sizes of the screen. The second we make this picture bigger, even if we padlock it so that they keep their proportions locked, as we go beyond the width of mobile, you can now see there's no longer a gap to the left and right. And if I hover over, you can see that blue outline. It's actually spilling beyond the width of the screen. Let's just reset. Let's undo those changes and reset the image as it was. There we go. The next thing I wanted just to do to show you the same point is select the post. So come into your layers panel, select the post, and you can see here that the width is set to 1FR or fill. Is exactly the same as 100%. So this is just telling the post to fill 100% of the device's width. Now, it can seem obvious to a lot of people to say, I think that looks a bit wide, because if I go to preview this on desktop, it looks insanely wide, right? It fills the screen from left to right. It's a nightmare to read that. So it's quite instinctive to think, right, well, I'll set that width to something a bit better. So you come into width, you'll set it to fixed, and then you'll drag this to a point where you think, oh, that looks about right at 750 on desktop. But then you look at your smaller devices, and on tablet, it's still looks okay because it still manages to be smaller than the screen. But on mobile, if I click preview, you can see there comes a point where we can no longer see the content and we can't scroll. It's locked to either side of the screen, it's overlapping, and we can't read it. The reason this is happening is because while we've set the width of the post to be 750 pixels, if the device is smaller than 750 pixels, the content isn't going to display correctly because it's going to be wider than the screen. Hence why on mobile, the text is cut off either side. So this is where we want to make sure that we avoid using fixed values because they can cause a real problem for responsiveness. And that brings us on to point 3. Instead of using fixed sizes when we want to create sizing, we want to use min and max height and width. So let's go back to this post and we're going to set the width to fill. So 1FR. If you are not familiar with 1FR, that's absolutely fine. Come to relative and it will say 100%. That might be something that's a bit more familiar to people. But if you are using FR, that just stands for like a fraction, essentially, or fractal. So basically that means that of the available space, we're going to take up 100% of it. If we were to do 0.5 FR, that's going to take up half of the available space. So it's a fraction of the available room. That's what FR kind of represents. So 1 being 100% of the available space. Let's say that we do want this to kind of be limited to a maximum width of 750. It's exactly what we need to do. So you can still set heights and widths for objects in your designs, but you just have to make sure that at the heart of what you're doing, it's still responsive across all devices. So using 100% fill, we can guarantee that on all devices, we're going to fit all the content on the screen. But as I showed you a second ago, on desktop, this text is spilling out far too wide, and we want to kind of make that slightly narrower. So where it says min max here, we want to click add, and we're going to add a maximum width of 750 pixels. And now what we've done is we've said we want the width of our post to be 100% of the screen's width, and we want it to grow indefinitely until it reaches 750 pixels wide, at which point it should stop growing and not grow any further. So I'll just show you how this looks on the sort of responsive breakpoint. So on desktop, it doesn't matter how wide that screen is now, that post is limited to 750 pixels wide. Then as I bring this in, it still responsively scales down for those smaller devices. So max width is a great way of setting those explicit widths without limiting it with, explicit dimensions. So the changes that we make here to desktop reflect on the smaller devices, which means that on all devices, this post is going to try and grow to the full width of the screen. And as soon as it hits 750 pixels wide, it won't grow any further. So that's kind of what we mean by using max width and minimum height rather than setting explicit values. To round off today's video, we're going to take a look at one last example and a slightly different layout. We're going to try and recreate a hero section that stretches to fill the entire height of the screen and responds to different screen sizes and makes sure that the content is all displayed. To do this, we're going to adhere to all three of those best practices for responsive website design in Framer, and therefore we're only going to edit the desktop breakpoint. We're not going to set any explicit values, and we're going to rely on minimum height and maximum width to achieve the look we're going for. So if I now just quickly preview the desktop and set it to full screen, you can see that the hero section, while the content's all there, is currently only filling about half of the screen space. So if we come back to the editor and select the hero section, most people's sort of intuitive thing to do would be to set the height explicitly to 100 VH or to the viewport height. And if we go and preview this, it looks great on desktop and larger screens, but the second we make that screen smaller and the text wraps, the content grows so tall that it stretches beyond the height of the page itself. So what we've got to imagine here is that we've actually explicitly told this hero section to be as tall as the device's screen and no taller and no smaller. Therefore, if the content moves and changes, and as you know, as we make the screen smaller, if the content grows taller than the screen size, it's not going to be able to show that on mobile devices. We're not going to be able to scroll or see that content because we have told that section to explicitly be as tall as the device, even if the content's taller. So instead, what we want to do with the hero section selected, we want to make sure that the height is set to fit the content, and therefore no matter what device we're on, is going to fit that content in that hero section and therefore reflect the height of that hero section based on the content. So we're back to where we were, exactly where we were with the only now takes up half of the available space on desktop, but it does ensure that as we get smaller and smaller, that we keep that content, that the section can grow taller than the screen and we can scroll. So if we want to keep that effect of filling the screen on those larger devices, what we want to do is set the minimum height to the viewport, or 100 VH, 100% of the viewport height. Now what this means is by default, the hero section will always be big enough to fit the content, but the smallest it could possibly grow to is the screen's height. So if I show you what I mean, on smaller devices, it grows so that it can fit the content, but as we make the screen bigger and bigger, the smallest the hero section can ever be is the height of the device. So we no longer have that gap. If I go to full screen, we no longer have that gap sort of halfway down the screen where it's stuck at the top. It fills the height of the screen, but it can't ever, as we shrink things down, cut off the content because it's still responding to the content within it when it sets its own height. And that's exactly what we mean by responsive design. It works well on desktop, tablet, and mobile. You know, arguably there's some changes needed with the font size, and you know, there are some tweaks that need making here, but on the whole, we've achieved a responsive full height hero section just editing the desktop breakpoint. So we could take this a little step further and you know, let's say that we find this stretches out a little bit too wide on desktop. We can then set the maximum width rather than an explicit width to somewhere around 800 pixels, and now that's nice and central. It doesn't take up too much room, but it still responds. So we've not set it explicitly, therefore as we get the screen smaller, it still resizes and stretches down. We haven't edited anything other than the desktop variant. We haven't set any explicit heights and widths, and we've relied on minimum and maximum heights and widths to achieve the look we're going for. And I hope this all makes sense. So those are my 3 top tips for making your website responsive in Framer. Of course, there are going to be certain contexts that this won't work. There will be slightly different layouts that you've gone for that might require a slightly different practice in order to make it responsive. But generally, for the vast majority of websites, this is exactly what you need to know. So if you're still lost on anything, if there's anything you need help with, drop a comment. Perhaps you enjoyed the video, you've got some feedback, anything at all, drop a comment below. Make sure you do like and subscribe as always, because it helps me out. And along with all the other content on this channel, it's brought to you by GoComment. If you're looking to improve your website with feedback and you want to work collaboratively with your clients or your team, leaving comments throughout your site, then go and check out GoComment. I'll leave a link in the description below. But as always, thank you very much for watching, and yeah, I'll see you in the next video.